My father is obsessed with my health, constantly buying me organic food and high-end vitamins. I thought it was love until I found the policy. He and my mother took out a $5 million life insurance plan on me, and lately the vitamins have started tasting like copper. The ceramic coaster hit the granite countertop with a sharp, clinical click that signaled the start of my day. It was 7 a.m. and my father was already standing there, his silver hair perfectly combed, wearing that calm, practiced smile that I had always associated with safety. In front of him sat the lineup, 3 small glass ramekins containing an assortment of capsules, some charcoal gray, others a translucent gold, and a tall, chilled glass of deep green liquid that smelled faintly of mown grass and swamp water. This was my internal shield, as he called it. For years I looked at these morning displays as a testament to a father's devotion. Most women my age were lucky if their parents remembered their birthday, but mine acted like my very survival was a full-time job. I picked up the green juice, feeling the cold condensation slip against my palm, and took a sip. It was thick and gritty, but I forced it down, knowing he wouldn't turn away until the glass was empty. "Every drop is a day added to your life, Maya," he whispered, his hand resting briefly on my shoulder. It was a heavy hand, warm and possessive. I offered a weak smile, ignoring the slight nausea that always seemed to follow the morning ritual. I felt like a prize-winning orchid, kept in a climate-controlled room, pruned and fed by a master gardener who was terrified of a single wilted leaf. My mother would drift in moments later, checking my temperature with the back of her hand or commenting on the sallow look of my skin. It was smothering, yes, but I told myself it was the byproduct of a love so deep it had become a neurosis. I was their only child, their miracle, and in their eyes the world outside our front door was a minefield of toxins and pathogens that only they could help me navigate. This obsession didn't sprout out of nowhere. It was a seed they had planted in my mind before I could even walk. Over dinner, while other families talked about school or sports, my parents would recount the story of the Winter of Tears. That was their name for the year I turned 4, when a simple chest cold allegedly turned into a life-threatening ordeal that left me in an oxygen tent for weeks. I have no memory of the hospital, only the stories they told. "You were so pale, Maya," my mother would say, her voice trembling with a rehearsed grief. "The doctors told us to prepare for the worst, but we refused to let go. They described me as a porcelain doll, born with a fragile constitution that required constant monitoring. I grew up believing my body was a faulty machine, prone to breaking down at any moment. This narrative was my cage. It kept me from playing sports, from going to sleepovers, and eventually from moving out of the guest wing of their sprawling estate. I was 30 years old and I still believed I was one missed vitamin away from a collapse. The illusion of the miracle cure began to crumble on a Tuesday afternoon, sparked by something as mundane as a misplaced postage stamp. My father had asked me to mail a letter to his accountant, but when I realized the envelope wasn't stamped, I wandered into his private study. The room smelled of old paper and expensive tobacco. I pulled open the top drawer of his heavy mahogany desk, expecting to find a book of stamps, but the drawer was jammed. Giving it a firm tug, I felt a folder catch and tear. As I tried to smooth out the crumpled paper, a bold blue header caught my eye. "Premium Notice Accelerated Death Benefit." I froze. My eyes scanned the fine print. It was a life insurance policy recently updated with a face value of $5 million. My name was the only one listed under the insured. At first, my heart swelled with a misguided sense of gratitude. I thought, they're making sure I'm taken care of even if I can't work. But then I saw the signatures. Both of them had signed as the primary beneficiaries. The policy wasn't a safety net for me, it was a jackpot for them. The discovery left a cold, hollow sensation in my chest that no organic tea could warm. That evening the routine felt different. The house was quiet, save for the rhythmic clinking of silver against china. Mom reached over with a glass bottle of liquid mineral essence, a new addition to my regimen that she claimed would help with the tremors I'd been complaining about. As she poured the thick, clear syrup into my water, I noticed how steady her hand was. She didn't have a single tremor. I took a sip, and for the first time I didn't just swallow it blindly. I let it sit on my tongue. A sharp, acrid taste bloomed in my mouth, bitter and unmistakably metallic, like sucking on a handful of old pennies or licking a rusted pipe. It was a flavor that bypassed my taste buds and sent a primal alarm ringing in the back of my brain. I looked up and saw my mother watching me. She wasn't looking at my face. She was staring intently at my throat, waiting for the muscles to swallow, her expression as blank and clinical as a lab technician's. A sudden wave of revulsion surged through me, a desperate need to reject whatever was in that glass. My hand slipped. The glass hit the floor, shattering into a dozen jagged shards, the mineral water soaking into the expensive Persian rug. The silence that followed was deafening. I expected a flurry of concern, "Are you okay, sweetheart?" or a rush to check for cuts. Instead, the air in the room curdled. My father stood up so abruptly his chair screeched against the floor. The doting parent mask didn't just slip, it disintegrated. His face contorted, his skin turning a mottled, angry purple as he stared at the wasted liquid. "Do you have any idea how much that cost?" he hissed, his voice dropping to a low, terrifying growl I had never heard before. He didn't look at my hand to see if it was bleeding. He looked at me with a cold, calculating fury as if I had just burned a pile of cash in front of him. In that moment, the golden cage didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a slaughterhouse, and I was the livestock being fattened up for the kill. I stepped back, my legs feeling like lead, finally realizing that my parents weren't afraid of me dying. They were just terrified I might not do it on their schedule. The silence that followed the glass shattering didn't just linger. It solidified. I stared at the dark stains spreading across the Persian rug, watching the precious liquid soak into the wool like an oil spill. My father's breathing was heavy, a jagged sound that tore through the air. For a second I thought he might actually strike me, but then, as if a switch had been flipped, the rage vanished. He blinked, his shoulders dropped, and he was once again the picture of a concerned patriarch. "I'm sorry, Maya," he said, his voice returning to that smooth, practiced baritone. "It's just, that supplement is extremely rare. I worry about what a missed dose might do to your heart." He reached for a linen napkin to help me clean, but I stepped back, my skin crawling. I didn't need a napkin. I needed an escape. The next morning I did something I hadn't done in years. I lied. I told them I was feeling particularly drained and wanted to sleep in, but as soon as I heard the heavy hum of my father's car pulling out of the driveway, I scrambled out of bed. I crept into the kitchen, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. With trembling fingers, I unscrewed the cap of the high-end vitamin bottle. I took 2 of the capsules and tucked them into a small plastic jewelry bag, hiding it deep in the pocket of my cardigan. My destination was a small, independent pharmacy 3 towns over, where an old high school friend named Sarah worked behind the counter. She was the only person I knew who had the equipment and the discretion to tell me what I was actually putting into my body. The drive to the pharmacy was a blur of paranoia. Every time a black SUV appeared in my rearview mirror, I felt a jolt of ice-cold sweat. I kept imagining my father's calm smile appearing in the window, asking me why I was so far from home without my medicine. When I finally reached Sarah, I tried to keep my voice steady. I handed her the baggie, claiming my parents were spending a fortune on these imported supplements and I wanted to see if I could find a cheaper generic version. Sarah frowned, holding the gold capsule up to the fluorescent light. "There are no markings on these, Maya. That's unusual for a high-end brand." She promised to run a basic scan and get back to me. The drive home felt longer, the air in the car thickening with the weight of my own suspicion. I spent the rest of the day in a trance of compliance, nodding as my mother described a new detox tea she wanted me to try, all while my stomach did somersaults. The suspicion turned into a frantic need for proof. That evening, while my parents were preoccupied with a televised opera in the den, I slipped out to the garage. It was a cold, sterile space, smelling of car wax and gasoline. In the far corner, behind a stack of winter tires, sat a heavy olive-drab filing cabinet I had never seen before. It was locked, but the key was tucked predictably under a nearby toolbox. My breath hitched as the drawer slid open with a metallic groan. Inside were folders labeled with my name, dating back 25 years. I pulled out a file from 1998. It wasn't full of hospital bills. It was full of correspondence. There were handwritten notes from a Dr. Eris Thorne, a man I remembered as a family friend who used to visit for summer barbecues. The notes were chillingly clinical, patient showing lethargy as requested, dosage adjusted to maintain the appearance of chronic fatigue. I realized then that my fragility wasn't a medical fact. It was a manufactured state, a long-term project designed to keep me dependent and eventually profitable. As the days passed while waiting for Sarah's call, the physical reality of my parents' care began to manifest in terrifying ways. My body felt like it was being slowly filled with lead. One afternoon the sun was shining and the garden looked so inviting that I decided to try and walk to the mailbox, a distance of maybe 50 yards. Halfway down the driveway my legs simply gave out. A strange, electric tingling started in my fingertips and raced up my arms, leaving them numb and useless. My vision flickered, the edges of the world blurring into a gray haze. I slumped against a stone pillar, gasping for air that felt too thin to breathe. I wasn't just tired, I was being extinguished. I looked back at the house and saw my father watching me from the upstairs window. He didn't move. He didn't rush out to help. He simply stood there, a silhouette against the glass, watching his investment struggle to stay upright. That evening the horror took on a domestic, almost casual tone. I wandered into the living room, my steps heavy and dragging, to find my mother sitting on the sofa with her tablet. She was scrolling through a digital catalog, her face illuminated by the blue light of the screen. I leaned over to see what she was looking at, expecting interior design or gardening. Instead, the screen was filled with images of polished mahogany and satin linings. It was a brochure for high-end funeral caskets. I felt the blood drain from my face, a cold shiver racing down my spine. I expected her to snap the tablet shut, to offer an excuse or look embarrassed. Instead, she slowly turned her head and looked me dead in the eye. A sad, hauntingly sweet smile touched her lips, the kind of smile you give a pet that you know has to be put down. "Oh, Maya," she whispered, her voice like silk. "You really do look so pale today. Why don't you go back to your room and rest? You won't have to worry about anything much longer." The finality of her words was still ringing in my ears when my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a text from Sarah. "Call me. Now." I locked myself in the bathroom and turned on the faucet to drown out my voice. When Sarah picked up, she sounded breathless, her professional tone replaced by sheer panic. "Maya, get out of that house," she hissed. I ran the spectrum analysis. "Those capsules aren't vitamins. They're packed with industrial-grade thallium, a heavy metal used in rat poison, and a high-dose sedative that slows the heart rate to near-death levels. It's a slow-burn cocktail, Maya. It's designed to look like a natural systemic failure. If you keep taking those, your organs will just stop." I slumped against the cold tile wall, the phone slipping from my damp palm. The $5 million policy, the casket brochures, the metallic taste, the fragile childhood, it all snapped into a single hideous picture. My parents hadn't spent 30 years loving me. They had spent 30 years cultivating a victim. They weren't my guardians. They were my slow-motion executioners, waiting with a pen in hand to sign for the payout once my heart finally gave up the fight. The golden cage wasn't just a metaphor anymore. It was a tomb, and the door was closing fast. The phone sat silent on the bathroom floor, the echo of Sarah's warning still vibrating in the small, tiled room. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, sunken eyes, sallow skin, a ghost of the woman I should have been. I realized then that if I wanted to live, I had to become an even better actor than my parents. I couldn't just stop taking the vitamins. A sudden surge in health would tip them off before I could make my move. I had to continue the performance of a dying woman while my blood slowly purged the thallium from my system. The art of the switch became my secret survival game. The next morning, when Dad placed the green juice and the gold capsules before me, my heart hammered, but my hand remained steady. I practiced a coughing fit, a violent hacking sound that forced me to hunch over and cover my mouth with a thick linen napkin. In that second of feigned distress, I palmed the capsules, sliding them into the hidden fold of my sleeve. For the liquid, I'd prepared a small sponge tucked inside my cardigan pocket, or I would wait for the moment my mother turned to check the kettle to dump the juice into a nearby potted fern. I replaced the poisonous minerals with cold, steeped chamomile tea I kept hidden in a perfume bottle. As the days passed, the fog in my brain began to lift. The tingling in my fingers receded, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. It was exhausting to keep my eyelids heavy and my voice raspy, but the more they thought I was fading, the more careless they became. With my mind finally clear, I realized I needed more than just an exit strategy. I needed to reclaim the value they had placed on my head. One night, after the house had fallen into a heavy, suburban silence, I crept back into my father's study. The mahogany desk no longer intimidated me. I knew he kept his digital life protected by a password he thought was sentimental. The date of my near-death childhood illness. Worked on the first try. I navigated through his financial folders, my eyes stinging from the blue light of the monitor. I found the insurance portal. They hadn't just insured my life. They had used my name to open offshore investment accounts, moving money like pieces on a chessboard. With a few deliberate keystrokes and the help of a digital notary service I'd set up earlier, I began the process of changing the beneficiary designations. If they wanted a $5 million payout for my accidental passing, I would make sure that legally, I was the one who controlled every cent of their liquid assets. I felt a surge of cold satisfaction. If I was to be a prize, I would be my own. By the end of the week, I felt strong enough to run a marathon, though I still dragged my feet when I walked past the kitchen. I decided it was time for the final act. I told my parents I wanted to cook for them, a thank you for their years of care. My mother looked surprised, her eyes darting to my father, who simply nodded, likely thinking this was the final rally before the end. I spent the afternoon in the kitchen, preparing a meal that looked like a page from a wellness magazine. Poached salmon, steamed greens, and a vibrant berry tart. I was meticulous, mirroring my father's obsessive cleanliness. I hummed a low tune as I worked, feeling a strange sense of peace. This wasn't just a dinner, it was a final meal. When we sat down at the heavy oak table, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. I had set the table with the good silver, the ones that didn't taste like pennies. You look energized today, Maya, my father remarked, his eyes narrowing as he watched me take a bite of the salmon. I smiled, a genuine, terrifyingly bright smile. I feel wonderful, Dad. I was thinking about the future today. About travel, about starting a business, about all the things I'll do once I'm fully recovered. I watched my mother's fork freeze halfway to her mouth. The mention of a future was like a foul word in this house. They exchanged a look, a quick, panicked glance that confirmed everything Sarah had told me. They didn't want a recovered daughter. They wanted a memory they could cash in. Maya, dear, don't overexert yourself, my mother said, her voice trembling slightly. You know how fragile your heart is. My heart has never been stronger, Mom, I replied, my voice dropping the raspy facade. I stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. I walked over to the sideboard and picked up a manila folder I'd hidden under a serving tray. I walked back to the table and, with the grace of a dealer at a high-stakes table, I laid the documents out between their dessert plates. On the left was the $5 million life insurance policy. On the right was the lab report from Sarah, with the word thallium highlighted in bright neon yellow. The silence that followed was absolute. The masks didn't just slip, they shattered. My father didn't reach for the papers. He just stared at them, his face draining of color until he looked as ghostly as he wanted me to be. My mother's hand went to her throat, her eyes darting around the room as if looking for a script that no longer existed. I know, I said, the two words cutting through the air like a blade. I know about the vitamins. I know about the fragile child who never existed. And I know about the copper taste in the water. I leaned down, my face inches from my father's. And just so you know, I've already contacted the authorities and my own legal counsel. Those accounts you worked so hard to build. They've been flagged. The beneficiary isn't you anymore. It's a trust you can't touch. My father's mouth opened but no sound came out. He looked small. For the first time in my life he looked pathetic. The doting protector was gone, replaced by a middle-aged man who had tried to kill his own daughter for a better retirement. My mother started to sob, a theatrical hollow sound, but I didn't feel a flicker of pity. The woman who had looked at casket brochures while I sat 5 feet away didn't deserve my tears. I didn't wait for their excuses. I didn't need a confession. I had the lab work and the files. I walked to the front door, my stride long and confident. I didn't take a suitcase. I didn't want a single thing from that house of poison pedestals. As I stepped out onto the porch, the night air hit me, cool, crisp, and untainted by the smell of expensive supplements. I took a deep, lung-filling breath, the kind of breath they tried to steal from me. I was 20 pounds lighter and a lifetime wiser. I walked down the driveway past the stone pillar where I had collapsed only days before, and I didn't look back. I was healthy, I was free, and for the first time in 30 years I was truly alive.